putting the focus on the challenges of Plasmodium vivax. I'm very delighted to present our moderator, Dr. Fitsum Tadesse, a researcher from the Armauer Hansen Research Institute in Ethiopia. Dr. Fitsum Tadesse focuses on the transmission of Plasmodium parasites from humans to mosquitoes and modulating factors. His interest is in translational research to support an informed decision-making process for malaria elimination. His group recently demonstrated the very high permissiveness of Anopheles stevensii mosquitoes that recently invaded the Horn of Africa, providing solid evidence for risks related to the invasion of this vector in Africa. He has led the development of a five-year action plan for the Ethiopian government to respond to Anopheles stevensii. Currently, he's supporting similar efforts in neighboring countries such as Djibouti. Dr. Tadesse is currently leading clinical and community cohort studies of Plasmodium vivax, infected patients and community members. He's also leading studies that aim to evaluate strategies and alternative second-line drugs to support the elimination efforts of the country. He also leads a multi-site assessment of the distribution of parasite with HRP23 gene deletion, which is relevant for the diagnosis of Plasmodium falciparum in a project entitled African Center for HRP2 Deletion Surveillance. Without much ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Fitsum Tadesse. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Nana, for the great introduction. Thank you, the MESA team, for having me. I'm really delighted to moderate this exciting topic, which remained neglected for a couple of decades, but now started to garner interest from partners, funders, and researchers. Plasmodium vivax is the most widely distributed Plasmodium species globally. It affects lives of many. But I want to highlight in here that you find most evidence referring this species to be not common in Africa, the continent which is highly hit by Plasmodium falciparum. But Plasmodium vivax indeed exists in Africa. The best example is in Ethiopia. If you take this country as an example, Ethiopia, 40% of the total case the country reports annually is due to Plasmodium vivax, which accounts to 9% of the global case reported annually. The fight against Plasmodium vivax remains challenging due to its unique biology. One of them is its tendency to remain dormant in the liver. The administration of the only drugs that are licensed to date, for instance, Primaquine, and the ones which are in the pipeline, like Dafiniquine, to clear this liver stage as radical cure medicines is associated with severe hemolysis, which could be life-threatening in some cases, related with a genetic disorder related with the enzyme called G6PD. In today's webinar, we'll focus on the treatment challenge for effective case management of Plasmodium vivax infections, considering the challenge I described earlier. We'll be discussing innovative ways to address malaria caused by Plasmodium vivax, and our first speaker will present on Plasmodium vivax radical cure, how we can improve it. And the second speaker will be dealing with mass Primaquine administration in Thailand and the challenge regarding acceptability and feasibility from a study she was coordinating recently. I'll first start by introducing the speakers. Our first speaker is Marcus Lacerda from the Tropical Medicine Foundation, Dr. Hetro Verado. Sorry for my mispronouncing some of the terms. Marcus was born in Brasilia. He has obtained his medical degree at the University of Brasilia in 1999, followed by a specialization in infectious disease in 2002, and a PhD in 2007 from University of Brasilia. Marcus is currently working as a physician in the FMT HVD, and he's a researcher at the Institutes Leonidas and Maria Dean. And he's also a professor of the graduate program in tropical medicine and hematology at the University of the Amazonas State, and an adjunct professor at the University of Texas Medical Branch. He was also an adjunct professor at the Kent University and Tulane Universities. Since 2017, he has been coordinating the Institute of Clinical Research Carlos Borborema in Manaus, Brazil. He has already supervised more than 50 undergraduate, MSc, PhD, and postdoctoral fellows. He has over 300 scientific publications and served as as an editor in the Journal of the Brazilian Society of Tropical Medicine, plus NTD, Frontiers Tropical Medicine. And his research focused on malaria, HIV, tuberculosis, snake bites, arbovirus, and other emerging diseases. And he was also one of the researchers who contributed on important evidence on the evaluation of tafenocline in a multi-center study that included Brazil recently. Our second speaker is from Thailand. We have Wanlapa Roobsoong, researcher assistant professor at Mahidol Vivax Research Unit from the Mahidol University in Thailand. Dr. Wanlapa got her PhD in medical technology from Mahidol University in 2011, followed by a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of South Florida, before she established herself at the Mahidol Vivax Research Unit in 2013. Her research focused on the molecular mechanisms of gametocytogenesis, where we perfectly overlap, and the biology of the liver stage of Plasmodium vivax, especially hepanocyte, with an emphasis to discover new anti-malaria drugs and vaccines. She also performs cross-sectional surveillance studies on G6PD in Western and Southern Thailand. Recently, she led the team to implement the pre-market mass drug administration in Southern Thailand, and we'll hear some of her findings from this study in today's presentation. Before proceeding to the presentation, I'll mention some housekeeping rules. Each of the presentations, the presenters will have 15 minutes to present their findings, and there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. Feel free to drop your questions in between the presentations in the chat box or raise your hands. I'll ask some of you to unmute yourself and ask the questions yourself. And for the presenters, you can also address some of the questions in the chat box if you find them convenient. We'll try to address all your questions, but if we run out of time, we will manage all the questions and publish them on the MESA website. The session will be available online on the MESA website and also on YouTube as described earlier, if you really want to share them with a wider community or review the topics covered later on. So I'll leave the floor to Marcus to give us the first presentation. Thank you, Marcus, for your willingness to present at this exciting webinar. Over to you, Marcus.
Thanks, Fitsum. It was a very nice presentation. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Good. Thanks very much for the invitation. It's been a long time that I do not convene with you guys from the MESA Alliance, and I think it's an interesting alliance in terms of putting together the new evidence on an elimination. And as Gina has already pointed out, we are very glad that Vivax was not out of the scope of this alliance, because Vivax will probably be the last frontier of elimination, being a more developed, a more ancient parasite. There are specific challenges. And I think that the major challenge, despite of the fact that it does not lead to the same burden of severe disease, it's not negligible the amount of people who suffer from this disease, and also the amount of people developing severe anemia, and also developing severe disease as well, especially in patients who already have another morbidity. So it comes very clear for those who have seen Vivax over time that the major challenge is how to improve the radical cure. So for falciparum, in 3 days, you were able to kill schizons in the blood, and that's end of the history. With Vivax, on the other side, we have hypnozoites, which might wake up 2, 3, or even more months later, as it is the case in India, in where you have relapses after 6 months of the acute infection. So the essential question is, how can we improve that radical cure? So far, we have 2 registered drugs for that. The first one being used for more than 50 years, which is Primaquine. And we probably don't know exactly how to use that drug, despite of the fact that it's been used worldwide for a long time. And the recently approved tafenoquine, which gives us the feeling that it should solve the issue of compliance. So let me show you here why it is so important to improve compliance. These are preliminary data from a municipality close to Manaus, in which we have followed these people in real life conditions. So the detection of new infections was based on people coming to the health post and being diagnosed. And you see here that when you supervise, you do a DLT, supervised Primaquine regimen. In Brazil, we use for 7 days. It's been used for more than 25 years. And when you supervise those people, you clearly see that the efficacy is something around 90%, okay? But if you do not supervise Primaquine, you see that it's something around 60%. So there is a huge difference between supervising Primaquine and not supervising Primaquine. And why that happens? Because people after 3 days, they're not sick anymore. They do not understand why they have to keep taking pills if they are not sick. So the major challenge here is how to give a radical cure to these patients without supervising them, because that's a huge burden for the health system if you have to supervise daily tablets being given to these patients. So we have started very recently, and that was postponed because of the pandemics, but the Ministry of Health has decided to implement in an experimental way tafenoquine, which was registered by the FDA 3.5 years ago, and later in Brazil. And considering that in Brazil, we have 85% of the cases due to Vivax, the Ministry of Health decided that tafenoquine could be a potential new tool to help decreasing the number of cases and possibilitating a further elimination in the future. So this study, which is TRUST study, it's a rollout study with tafenoquine. The idea is in an observational design to investigate whether Vivax patients over 16 years old are treated properly with tafenoquine in accordance with the appropriate level of G6PD activity. As you all may know, the most common type here is the African type, and it's present in 5% of the population in the Amazon. So TRUST has several phases. The first one is to deploy the drug in high and medium level facilities in Manaus and Porto Velho. Those are the two cities that also participated in phase 2 and 3 trials for the register of tafenoquine in the past. So that made it easier for us to plan in advance the deployment of this drug to these facilities. We have already achieved the 600 cases of people who have used tafenoquine. And now we are moving to a second phase in which the low-level facilities will also use tafenoquine for Vivax treatment after the G6PD screening. We will perform the second interim analysis again after 600 new cases are seen in those facilities, and a final report after approximately 1 year will be generated with probably 8,000 people who have been used tafenoquine, but a huge database to support our conclusions. So the key elements involved were this multidisciplinary health staff. We have started by training physicians, pharmacists, nurses, lab technicians. Keep in mind that it's the first time in Brazil that we are screening for G6PD before the prescription of a drug. So that poses a challenge, a new step in the process of diagnosis and treatment. There's close communication with local health secretaries and health managers. That was the major challenge, to persuade those two municipalities and to take advantage of the ongoing reporting system. So it's not a parallel system. We have used the same CVAP reporting system, and also reinforcing the need to report acute hemolytic anemia, as Fitsum has already pointed out. There was a diversity of materials for professionals and patients as well to try to understand what ephenoquine is, the need to test for G6PD, the problem of females that change their activity from time to time, so they need to be tested every time they have malaria, but men, they should keep a card in which they have their status, and that should not change over time. There was a lot of presential training sessions, guides, leaflets, short videos, and a lot of WhatsApp cards. In Brazil, we use WhatsApp more than phone, than anything. So this is how we have tested people in the same way, using the same templates of the Ministry of Health, telling people the right time to do the test after the Vivax diagnosis and how they should decide. So we are not using tefenoquine in pregnant women. We're not using in those under 16 years old because it's not registered for that age. And we need specifically G6PD testing to be performed before the use. Those are the online training courses which were distributed to all the professionals, all the cards which we gave with very key information. And also for malaria patients, comic books trying to explain the need for G6PD testing. We have been using the quantitative test, which is needed for tefenoquine because we need at least 70% of activity of the enzyme to be allowed to use tefenoquine. And we also give them a card in which they have their status on G6PD for future infections. So we have already concluded the first phase, as you see, in 9 facilities in both municipalities, which concentrate a huge burden of the disease in the Brazilian Amazon. And Quality Trust is a side project which has been very useful for us because it gives us the first impressions about this implementation. So the first impressions from the health professionals' perspective is that the tefenoquine contributes to treatment adherence. The main error in performing the test occurs in pipetting. We have already detected that problem and how to solve it. They don't fully understand the need to retest female patients, but it's been worked in the field. And the lack of G6PD tests are a challenge because when you don't have the test available, you cannot use tefenoquine. So these are preliminary impressions from their side. From malaria patient side, a single dose treatment is better because obviously reduces the time of treatment. This is a picture of the box of Cosenis. That's the name of tefenoquine in Brazil. And they know that some cannot take tefenoquine, but they need to understand better their relationship with the G6PD testing. They are also being told about potential side effects of acute hemolytic anemia in case there is anything wrong with their G6PD test and they eventually develop hemolysis. So the next steps, just to conclude, is first entry analysis is ongoing now. We have in mid-December our next ISOC meeting to evaluate if this is the right time to move towards the lower level facilities. And we are already preparing for the second phase by training healthcare professionals in the low level facilities. Thanks a lot for the Ministry of Health in Brazil. Despite of COVID, we had to postpone the beginning of the project, but it's finally happening, and it's a dream come true that after 44 years of development of this drug, it came finally to the field, even in an experimental way. And thanks a lot. I have to acknowledge the contribution that the Secretary of Health from the municipalities and the states gave to this project, and the funding from MMV as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcus, for the great presentation. It's always exciting to learn these new advancements from groups heading this one like ahead of all the other countries. It's amazing what you are doing there, and also the integration of the science and also the policy in real time. So we will be coming back to you with Q&A sections at the end of the presentation. Next, we proceed to the next speaker of the day, Wanlapa. Wanlapa, is over to you, please.
Yes, thank you. Do you see my screen?
Yes, you can see your screen.
Okay. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. So my name is Wanlapa Roobsoong from Mahidol Vivax Research Unit, Faculty of Tropical Medicine, Mahidol University. It's my great honor to be a speaker at the MESA webinar today. So I'm going to share with you our recent study on mass primaquine preventive treatment in Thailand, the acceptability and feasibility study. So as the global malaria elimination is aimed to eliminate malaria in 2030, zeroing in on malaria elimination would need more stringent and innovative tools, which current tools and implementation are working around two areas: the vector control and case management, with the aim to reduce the clinical cases. But with the unique characteristic of Plasmodium vivax that can form the dormant stage in the liver, causing the relapses of the disease in months or years later, that will be become a difficulty of the malaria species to be eliminated. And targeting those hypnozoid carriers and asymptomatics are quite difficult using the current available tools. On the other hand, the researcher tried to put a lot of effort in developing new tools, including the highly sensitive RDT, PCR, and serology assays. Soon these will be available and will be very useful to target those carriers. Current implementation that National Malaria Control Program are currently implementing, including the mass screen and treatment and mass drug administration. So for our study, we performed the mass primaquine preventive treatment or MPPT in the southern Thailand in two provinces, Yala and Narathiwat. And as we do aware that the primaquine can cause hemolysis in individuals who have G6PD deficient. So we also performed the cross-sectional G6PD study on the MPPT sites and also the Western Thailand in Tak province. So these two areas are the major sites for malaria burden in Thailand. For G6PD cross-sectional study, we use the EDTA finger prick blood for testing and the detection method, including the standard spectrophotometry using port scientific reagent, the standard bowel sensor, and CareSat G6PD RDT. So all the samples were analyzed within 24 hours after the blood collection. And as we also testing the enzyme activity, so all the blood samples were kept cool immediately after blood collection to ensure the stability of the enzyme. So here you can see, so this the western side, the yellow one is the western side of Thailand, and the pink one here is the southern side of Thailand. So firstly, we calculate the G6PD enzyme activity reference value differently between western and southern, because we're not sure about the ethnicity, whether it's also impact the enzyme activities, and we found that the reference enzyme activities or adjusted male median that we use here for both spectrophotometry and bowel sensor were actually different among the two sites. But in terms of implementation, having two different reference value will not be practical. So we are recalculating the data by combining all the data sets, and we obtain the new adjusted new male median, which is the reference value for spectrophotometry and bowel sensor at 8.4 and 7.3 unit per gram hemoglobin, which resulting in the G6PD enzyme deficiency cutoff at 2.5 and 2.2 unit per gram hemoglobin for spectro and bowel sensor respectively. So we use the new cutoff to calculate the diagnostic performance of the standard G6PD bowel sensor for identification of the G6PD deficiency. So we use the two cutoff, the one that provided from the company, which is a 3.9 unit per gram hemoglobin, and we also incorporate our study cutoff at 30% and 40% just to see whether which one would be the more appropriate deficiency cutoff. And we found that for study cutoff at 40% enzyme activity provide better diagnostic performance and incomparable with the company enzymatic cutoff. So the main key point for me on this slide is that even though this is the first study that validate systematically for the G6PD biosensor, and with the cutoff from the company is also appropriate for Thai population. So further study for enzyme activities in different areas of Thailand may not be needed. For G6PD RDT, we also calculate the prevalence between the two sites, and they were similar at 7 or 6%, depending on the area, and male accounted for the majority of the enzyme of the G6PD deficient. And when we calculate the diagnostic performance of G6PD RDT, it's very promising. Even though the National Malaria Control Program in Thailand implemented the CASA G6PD RDT for quite some time in order to provide a safe primaquine treatment, but the systematic study or evaluation of this test in Thai population has not been tested. So this is very good data. We also compare the diagnostic performance between the RDT and biosensor for like further selection whether which one is better for implementation in our MPPT study. And since the diagnostic performance are comparable between the two assays, so we consider the cost effectiveness in which the RDT was selected in our MPPT study. So actually the goal for our MPPT is to evaluate acceptability, feasibility, and effectiveness of the primaquine treatment augmented to national standard of care in Thailand, which this is the big collaboration between Faculty of Tropical Medicine, Mahidol University, and the Office of Disease and Prevention and Control 12, which take care of malaria management in southern Thailand. With the key workforce, the big collaboration from vector-borne disease center in both study sites and also district public health officers, and more importantly, the village health workers who actually do all the activities. And in this study, we provide a low dose primaquine 0.25 milligram per kilogram dose for 14 days. And we also detect the prevalence, malaria prevalence by qPCR during the study period. So this study is a crossover cluster randomized controlled trial in which we separate the study into two groups. Group 1, we receive the mass primaquine treatment in year 1 together with standard prevention and control provided by the NMCP. And then in year 2, they will receive only the standard prevention and control. So in group 2, they will firstly receive only standard prevention control in year 1 and followed by the MDA in year 2. And on the left-hand side, for each year of the MDA round, we also perform the mass blood surveys, 3 rounds. The first round, MBS1, is including the G6PD and eligibility screening, and also baseline assessment before provide the primaquine. And another 2 mass blood survey after primaquine treatment, 3 months apart. So for non-MDA group, they will not receive the primaquine. Before we start the MDA activity, we performed the site preparation, try to engage with the community, make them also understand not only our study, but malaria in general and how important that the primaquine or the mass drug administration will help eliminate malaria in their areas. So we get a big collaboration again with the regional NMCP, district public health officers, village headman, and Islamic headman. And we also provide the training to village health workers, including the GCP, the finger prick, EDTA blood collection, how to do the dry blood spot or blood smear, and also hemoglobin measurement using a hemoglobin analyzer. For baseline assessment and eligibility check, so we collect the dry blood spot and malaria blood film for everyone that would like to participate in our study and have age at least 1 year and over, to assess the prevalence of the malaria in the areas. And also we perform the EDTA finger prick for G6PD status and weight measurement for preparing the drug, the primaquine drug. As for national guideline, we provide primaquine based on the weight of the individuals. And the eligibility criteria including age at least 7 years and older, or weight at least 15 kilograms, G6PD normal, non-pregnant or lactating, no allergic to primaquine, and no history of drug reaction after primaquine. So for some of these questions, we also get the information from the questionnaire when village health worker visit the household. So once we got eligible volunteers, we prepare the drug preparation as we provide by the weight of the participants. So for in terms of practical implementation, we provide the drug package, which including the primaquine packs enough for 14 days for each individual with the label, the name of the individual's label on it, and also the dot forms. So each village health worker will have like binders, the collective of the participants that under their care. And for the one who has G6PD deficiency, we also provide the G6PD deficiency card for them, so they can bring the card when they get the service from health centers in the areas when they get sick, and no need to retest G6PD status again. So village health worker will perform the direct observed treatments with the daily household visit. And we also perform the measure hemoglobin level prior to primaquine administration on day 1, day 2, day 4, 6, 7, and the last follow-up on day 28 to see whether if there is any side effect and whether they recover from the hemolysis. And for the one who dropped in hemoglobin to less than 8 grams per deciliter or presence of black urine, we stop to provide primaquine. As there was a lot of concerns or questions, not only from the village health workers, but also from the participants. So we also perform the real-time consultation to them, and we review the hemoglobin level daily virtually. So we mostly use the online communication between us and village health workers. So as the results, as you can see here, a lot of numbers, but what I would like to highlight here is that for the participants, or we call respondents, that participate on the MDA, as you can see in both round, 925 and 612% here. Once they committed to participate, the coverage for complete 14 days regimen is quite high at 87% and 92% in round 1 and round 2 respectively. But even though we test the G6PD status before, but we also obtain 4.8 and 4.6% adverse events for both rounds of the MDA. And when we took a closer look for those who have side effects, the major concern is hemoglobin level drop to less than 8 grams per deciliter and black urine. And we took a look on those individuals who had this side effect and found that even they have a normal status of G6PD in both RDT with the previous screening and also G6PD spectrophotometry, and the proportion of male and female is very equivalent. But overall, the hemoglobin level did not change among the 14 days of treatment among the participants in the study. So overall, it's quite safe to do so. In terms of effectiveness, so on the bottom, at the upper table, as you can see, we separated into two rounds, round 1 and round 2, at the prevalence of PV positive pre-MDA and post-MDA. And a lot of numbers, but at the end, for when compared between MDA and non-MDA group, we didn't see any statistical significant difference in terms of the reduction of the prevalence of Plasmodium vivax in the participants. But when we look at within group, in group 1 at the bottom table, group 1 and group 2 before providing primaquine and after 2 rounds of mass blood surveys, we found that for both groups, we got significantly reduction in terms of the PCR prevalence of P-Vivax in the participants. But as I forgot to mention that we started this project in 2009 and 2020, which is the COVID also hit Thailand at that time, and also some of the lockdown. So we think that maybe this reduction in broad group may be also the artifact from the lockdown policy in the areas. So we further take a look in the overall prevalence of the clinical cases between study site and non-study site in a year before we start implement the MDA in 2018 and 2019 and 20, as you can see in orange, and gray line is the period that we start MDA. As you can see on the upper graph, so at the beginning of before the study implemented in the area, the clinical cases from our study site accounted for 70% of clinical cases in the district. We call in the district. But once we start the MDA 2 years, the proportion of the clinical cases due to our study sites reduced to less than 30% for both rounds. And as we are aware that might be also the effect of the COVID-19. So we look at the data from non-study sites. In the opposite way, the non-study site, we found increase in the clinical cases, unlike our study site. So I think that with the reduction of clinical cases, both from the National Malaria Database in Thailand and also in our study using the PCR prevalence, is the true reduction due to the MDA. So in summary, for G6PD cross-sectional study, as I mentioned earlier, we found different among the study sites, and that could possibly due to different ethnicity between Thai-Myanmar border and Thai-Malaysian border. And the G6PD, RDT, and standard G6PD biosensor show good diagnostic performance in identifying G6PD deficiency. For MPPT regarding the safety, so overall hemoglobin level among the 14 days course of primaquine treatment quite normal, and with the 1.1% significant adverse events, including black urine and drop in hemoglobin concentration, in which they all have G6PD normal. So underlying hematological diseases might also partially or possibly contribute to this hemolysis phenomenon as well, in which we are planning to study further. In terms of acceptability and feasibility, so community engagement is an essential element. Try to make them understand and actually try to understand them better why the compliance for 14-day primaquine treatment is not that high in the area. And we found that in fact it's pretty like simple, just the seasonal, because for their traditional, they believe that when eating the primaquine with the fruits, the local food is prohibited. So that's why if they get malaria, they won't take the complete primaquine treatment. And normally malaria season is also the local fruit seasons as well. So they select fruits rather than taking the primaquine. And for the period of mass drug administration, in our study, we performed the MDA before the peak of the malaria seasons. I think that's also one of the reasons that's why we saw a big drop in terms of clinical cases during the actual peak of malaria season. And from the focus group interview, which I didn't mention here because it quite take some time. So in summary, the MPPT has potential to be expanded, but prior to 6PD testing is needed, and actually the science are expanding the study on their own with scientific support from us. And we really need the cooperation from local stakeholders, not only national malaria control program, but also the local stakeholders at the village or district or province level. In terms of the effectiveness, so MPPT in our study, so one of the standard prevention and control from the national malaria guidelines, if they found PCR positive, they also provide the treatment. So in this study, it's kind of mixed model between mass primaquine treatment and targeted treatment. And the direct impact from the study would be causing the reduction of overall malaria cases in the study areas, and the indirect impact, which we foresee that it stay longer and we can still see the effect in the area right now, is that the villager and especially the health officers who actually manage cases in the area have the better understanding on the malaria disease and also transmission, and especially with the officers, they have better knowledge on malaria, especially the asymptomatic cases in the area, so they can proactively provide information to the villagers continuously. And this is my last slide. I would like to acknowledge big thanks actually to village health workers from the areas that they actually very proactive and perform daily household visits to collect all the data for us, and also the government official, Department of Disease Control and Office of Disease Prevention and Control 12, who also lead the activities, and also from Mahidol University side, the Mahidol Vivax Research Unit and Biophys. So Professor Jaranit, the PI of the study, and also Wang Nutragun, who also lead the diagnosis of malaria cases by PCR. That's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the great presentations, Marcus and Wanlapa. We are moving to the Q&A session now. Please pose any questions to the chat or raise your hands. Maybe I'll ask some of you to unmute yourself and ask the questions. We'll proceed with the first question. We had the first question from Jessamon. Maybe if you can unmute Jessamon and forward your question to Marcus.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, well, loud and clear.
Okay, hi Marcus. Thanks MESA for organizing this, and nice to see all your face again. I'm not so sure I cannot show my face, but that's okay. My question to Marcus is that when you try the tefenoquine, how many % of the patient that they cannot take tefenoquine in your area?
So the amount of deficiency is supposed to be 5%, but when they come with malaria, because of a certain level of protection, we actually have to exclude a little bit less, around 3% of them are not able to use tafenoquine, and keep in mind that that's not necessarily those who are deficient, because when using tafenoquine as per label, we need an activity higher than 70%. So I'm not saying that those who are not able to use tafenoquine are true G6PD deficient people, but they don't have that level of security of 70%.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you, Marcus,
Thank you.
for the response. Yeah.
But that's still
And-
very low percent that you have to exclude, right? 3% is not high. It's lower. I don't know, in Asia, normally the area that have G6PD dev is around 5 to 6 or maybe 10, sometime in some area in Myanmar. But you said that this person have to have very high, about over 70% of the enzyme activity, which is quite high, and you just drop only 3% of them.
I don't think we are able to compare Thailand and Brazil. It's different types of variants.
Yeah. Yep. Good.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you, Jessamine, for the nice question. I have a related question with this one, maybe for both of you, Marcus and Wanlapa. Well, we cannot like always do the G6PD testing, and we hope that we'll be bringing elimination. But if the infections persist, and then if we have to do these mass campaigns or individual-based treatment, case management, well, maybe it might be wise to have like a national database where people have their phenotype or genotype recorded, and then so that you can go back and then without doing the G6PD testing again, then you can assign them to the treatment. Is there any effort in Brazil, Marcus, in that regard? Or Wanlapa from Thailand experience?
It's a very good idea in theory. The problems that health workers, they are not able to access such data banks timely. So what we are trying to do is to give them the cards, which was also given by Dr. Wanlapa in Thailand. Because they are not able to access the system and check the status of that specific person. Everything is still on paper in most of the places. And coming to that, I would like to know if in Thailand, they've checked the amount of people who are able to retain their cards, because in Brazil, it's probably 50% only of them still have their cards when they have a further infection. I would like to know if they've registered that information in Thailand.
So for Thailand, regarding some questions, so actually all the clinical data, or especially G6PD data, is quite like the privacy of the individual. So it's not like the open wide national database for that, but for particular health service provider, they'll still keep the record on their own. So regarding the G6PD card, so National Malaria Control Program in some of the areas proactively test and collect that data, but they don't provide the cards. But for the hospital, they provide the cards. In terms of retention of the cards, I have no data, but at the service provider side, they have all the records. So if the same patients come back again, they already have the data in place. So no need for retest again. And also in our study, we also provide the cards in which we also notify the local health officers that in these areas, like some population already been tested for G6PD, and we provide the name to them with the consent for sure from the participants. So they have, at least from the health provider side, they have the information.
Okay, thank you. Wanlapa, we have a related question from Itin Kiao. The question is about the rationale for choosing only Primaquine for MDA.
So for those rationale, at least three that based on our design. The first one, which is very important, is that as this not the like regular clinical trial, so with the aim of the study, we let the National Malaria Control Program lead the study. So with the National Drug Committee, we only provide the primaquine, number one. Number two is that with our target, we would like to eliminate the hypnozoid formation, in which if we can eliminate the blood stage in asymptomatic individuals from our study, it will disappear within a month if we can eliminate the dormant form in the liver. And the third reason is that we're not sure what would be the blood stage anti-malarial that would be perfectly fit with our study. And we are also concerned about the drug interaction, and this is not the patients, it's the normal population. So that's why we decide to go with only primaquine treatment.
And sorry, so coming to that, did you perform a thick blood smear or a rapid diagnostic test for malaria in all those people when they were enrolled?
Not if they don't have fever, but if they do, we do the malaria RDT.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, for the one that positive by PCR from mad blood surveys, the National Malaria Control Program also provide the blood stage anti-malaria drug to them as well.
Okay, thank you, Wanlapa. So we have a hand raised from Juan. Maybe Juan, if you would like to ask your question, you can unmute and raise your question. Or I think
I have answered. So for this study, our team, the scientists from our team, including myself, were the one that actually performed the test, both RDT, spectrophotometry, and the biosensor. So we haven't really deployed the test to the village health workers level. So we don't have that data yet. But in terms of the malaria clinics or malaria posts, who actually directly taking care of the providing anti-malaria drug, they were well trained to use the G6PD RDT, and also recently with the standard G6PD biosensor.
Yeah. So how do you did you compare between the quantitative GCPD test with the qualitative GCPD test? How is the percent of the deficiency of the GCPD among your study side?
So as I showed you earlier in my slide, so both qualitative and quantitative in terms of defining G6PD deficiency are very similar with a comparable diagnostic performance. So which around 10% in male and 4 to 5% in female in both qualitative and quantitative assays.
Yeah, thank you. But I have one more question for you. That because you say that you organize to the group of study that the first group is the MBI, and the second group is you compare with the non-MBI. And so how did you use non-MBI at the in the community? How?
So is that your question is about the engagement or what? And
the first group that means you organize the mass treatment in the community in your study site. That means that you select the subject study subject. Yeah, it's a follow. It's like based on the age or the sex or something like that. But yes, for the second, I concern is the second group, that means non-MBA. How do you do?
So actually, in terms of the site selection for both NDA and non-NDA group, we base on the prevalence of malaria cases, in which in both area is around 1%, because we are the low transmission setting. And in terms of the sex, we don't select. It depends on the participation of the villagers, and apparently we got very good balance between male and female.
Yeah.
But the site selection criteria majorly with the prevalence of malaria cases.
Thank you, Wanlapa.
Thank you, Joan, and thank you all the participants for the active participation and also the presenters for the great talk. I would like to give one final chance to the presenters to give their final remarks, maybe 1 minute each. If you have any comments.
I just wanted to make a final remark that it's still a long way that we have to go to try to understand how to do better radical cure, and there's a possibility that some people in some places will take advantage of the phenequine. I'm not saying, I think nobody's saying that it's a magic bullet that should be the one responsible for elimination. We should be using primaquine for a long time still. What I think that it's still necessary is to find a safer way to use primaquine. Many countries do not use primaquine because they're afraid of G6PD deficiency. So I think it is time to give the opportunity to these people to be tested for G6PD and have full access to primaquine, including larger doses that are necessary in some places, for example, in Southeast Asia. So I don't think that we are even close to a final and definitive radical cure. Each country will have to decide based on their genetic background what's the best way to deal with that.
Yeah, definitely true. Thank you, Marcus. Wanlapa?
So for me, I'm more toward the mass drug administration. I think as the country going for malaria elimination, and we need more stringent tools, in which Thailand did a good job, in my opinion, in reducing cases. But we observed the stability of the clinical cases for a while, so we need more stringent tools. And one of the key elements that I think it would be important is and cheaper way to do is try to engage with the patients, and also the villager community engagement is a key factor. And from our study, we observe that targeted treatment are also effective in terms of reducing clinical cases, but the way to identify those asymptomatic would need more innovative one, because right now the most sensitive one that we have in hands is the qPCR, and with the new coming, the serology test, I think it would be very useful. Try to reduce the cases and not over treatment to the population that not actually have the parasite in their bodies. That's over.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
Over to
very
you,
much.
Nana. Yeah.
Thank you, Fitsum. Thank you very much, Wanlapa, Marcus, and Fitsum for your time and for this excellent session we've had today. Thank you all participants as well very much for your time and wherever you are. I'm now on with my video. Thanks, sorry and apologies for the technical issues earlier on. We hope you've all enjoyed today's webinar, and we'll be sending a follow-up email with the video recordings and presentation and a summary of today's talk. Today's webinar is the last of this year, in December, and we hope you've enjoyed and learned as much as we have here at MESA. Wishing you all the very best. Stay safe, and we'll be keeping you posted on events next year. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.